Time for a little bit of whimsy, and I'd like to introduce you all to Noah Solomon.
Hey everyone, I'm Noah. I'm a product engineer at FAL, and yeah, so I wanted to talk about sort of like whimsy in this age of AI for apps, and why optimizing for that feeling is more important now than ever, and why the barrier to entry for like kind of adding this feeling to your app is actually at an all-time low. So it's easier than ever. So yeah, why I think like basically whimsy, those intentional moments of emotional contrast are becoming sort of like a new moat. So this talk is like sort of brief, and it is like sort of fairly obvious, like the most memorable things are like the things that are most different by definition. So really I'm just sort of like sharing my framework on like how I think of whimsy in this context. And yeah, I always feel like I've been like kind of more silly, like just like in life, like this is sort of my like philosophy, just like silly maxing, stuff like that. Like I have silly bands on, I have like Simpson shoes, I have like a silly cartoon PFP on LinkedIn. Like I just, so sort of like this talk is like me expressing my opinion on how these sorts of ideas can be injected into your app. So yeah, I think right now, like with LLMs, they're providing like all this ability for anyone to generate apps that create utility, but at the same time, I think this is creating an emotional floor for apps where you can create utility, but it's just lacking in emotion because all you do is just say a single like sentence on what you want, and then it just generates beyond that. But also, in contrast, there's also generative media, and that is creating an emotional ceiling where if you utilize these video models, these image models, you can actually just create a totally unique experience with very low friction, and you don't need a 20-person team. You can just do this by yourself. Yeah, and at the top, I sort of have sort of like what I'm going to be talking about, sort of the ordering. Like, all of it is around contrast, just at different levels of the hierarchy. Like, vision is it's like perceptual contrast. Attention is like your brain's conceptual contrast, and so whatever is memorable to you is like emotional contrast. So for example, like the people that you're closest with oftentimes you don't think about what you've discussed with them and whatnot. You really just think about like how they've made you feel. So starting from the bottom, so vision. And originally our eyes evolved not for reading or targeting prey, but just to detect light. So is it day or is it night? That was all it was. And over time, our eyes evolved edge detection. So just really noticing where light changes. And if there's no contrast, you just literally can't see shape. So vision at its core is just a system for detecting meaningful change. And then one level up is cognition. So the most important thing to remember here is that attention is the brain's edge detector, and it spikes when expectations in your mental model when it breaks. So your brain works like a prediction machine. It builds a model of what happens next, and really it ignores everything that fits. The moment something breaks the pattern, that's when your attention spikes. So like, for example, driving a familiar route, you can like easily zone out, even though what you're actually doing is fairly complex. But the moment something unexpected happens, like a pedestrian walks in front of you, that prediction error is going to spike your brain to be very in the moment and cognizant of everything that's going on. And I really like SpongeBob, so I had to like throw in an example. So this is like an episode called Not Normal. So basically, like the whole idea is like he tries to flatten himself because of something Squidward said. So his personality, voice, body, and his house to fit the mold. And what he's doing here is just removing all edge detection from his identity. And this leads to him becoming invisible to all others and alien to himself. Patrick doesn't want to hang out with him. And yeah, so like when nothing breaks prediction, it just leads to this like general uninspired feeling. So modern AI apps are often clear and very usable, but oftentimes can be totally indistinguishable. So what happens when nothing breaks prediction is you get a flat line. And right now, a lot of modern UIs are in that zone. So because of design systems like ShadCN, people can, scaffold beautiful functional apps instantly, but they all use the same primitives. And with the LLM-generated copy and convergent icon libraries, suddenly every app just sort of feels the same. So yeah, like we were saying, like when there's no prediction break, there's no attention, which means that there's no index in their mind of what they did on your app, so there's no memory. And all of these like generally do look very, very good, and ShadCN is super popular for a reason. But aesthetics without surprise is like just fog. So even if the default looks amazing, if everything is the same shade of amazing, then it will just be like that much harder for anything to be remembered distinctly. So my sort of general thesis is just like when everything works, working is no longer enough. And utility has just been democratized. So I think like delight, silliness, whimsy, that's sort of the new edge. And that's how you can actually become indexed in people's minds. So I think that this is like a big unlock, obviously, like just allowing anyone to generate any amount of utility. But if you want people to stick, to actually come back to your product and having a meaningful emotional connection to it, then you really need to think at a higher level than just what sort of abilities do you want to enable your users to have. So sort of like why I think vibe code apps don't often stick. I think design systems won in this, utility won, but whimsy lost. Like there's a clear notion of like what design systems won, and anyone can create utility, but I think that the novelty per app is actually quite substantially lower. So like I was mentioning, convergent UIs, consistent design systems, just placeholder text slop, and no whimsy, and because of no contrast, there's just no memory trace. And so I see whimsy as like the artificial edge detection. So like whimsy being small, intentional surprises that are what actually bring memory and attention back. I think these tiny breaks in expectation are what spike the brain's radar. So I think of it like the brain's SEO, just like a lot more confusing and esoteric than just regular Google SEO. Like we don't understand the brain's ranking algorithm. All we know is that if there's no contrast, in this case, emotional contrast, then there's just no index. So I say that whimsy gives us a memorable surface area, and it's the highest leverage way to stand out in the fog of sameness. Oh yeah, that was just like a little animation my sister actually designed for me for something I was working on. But I see like generative media as the on-ramp for this whimsiness. So previously, designing your own custom icons, your own animations, were just really hard. You just needed multiple people to be working on this constantly. And the concept of like at runtime, user-specific animations, icons was just not even physically possible. So now that's not actually the case. Like we can generate and animate brand elements, things like user-specific trophies, loading screens, all on the fly. And I think this completely changes the emotional ceiling, especially for like small teams, like I said. You just can do this all alone. You don't need like a Pixar budget anymore. You just need like 1 or 2 API calls. So the ladder for this, I think there's a lot of ways, and I'll just throw some examples out there, of ways you could sort of like add silliness, uniqueness, dynamism to your app with generative media is like, for example, trophies based on user actions, avatars that evolve with usage, custom icons or logos that actually like breathe, and like playful loaders that reflect like what's going on, And all these can just be like layered in over time. Doesn't need to be like a all at once sort of thing or all up front. Yeah, and I have a few examples. So some related to generative media, some related to just like general kind of silliness. Like Posthog OS is Posthog's new sort of like base UI that they released a month or two ago. And I think this is just like a clear example of where just like silliness has won the hearts of like so many people over to Posthog. Like there's no tangible benefit as far as like what utility they've gained from this big design change, but there is clear benefits to like how that makes people feel. And so I think that sort of thing is going to be seen much more in the near future, of nothing really being added utility-wise, but everything being added in the emotional aspect of apps. So for example, for Posthog, they have like Easter eggs. I believe somewhere on this they have like a feet pics folder or something, which is like makes no sense in regards to like utility, but very much does for if the objective function is like sort of like this emotional contrast that I've been talking about and silliness. And also I think it's pretty cool that they've injected novelty, but also at the same time familiarity, because it's just an OS sort of UI, like everyone's familiar with that, but it's just like not very usual. So I think it's also very cool if you can figure out how to inject novelty without breaking the experience, which is why they're there, of using the utility. And I think that's something that definitely needs to be balanced. Like if you are injecting so much novelty that it's so unfamiliar that it's just unusable, then you've kind of done a disservice to your users. So that's something always worth keeping in your mind. Also on the trophy aspect, this is just a cool app. Basically, like you take a photo of your fish, generates icons for you and like the metadata about that fish. So this is just an example of like, user-specific icons. Like I guess before, like there was no possible way you could do this. Like do you just have like 10 artists just like immediately trying to draw something when they take a photo? It just wasn't even possible. So generative media opens up a lot of avenues, which previously you couldn't even do. And yeah, so here's just like a little example, like just random animated icons that you can add, just to add a little more dynamism. But yeah. So to sort of bring this home, I see vision as like contrast and light, attention, contrast, and prediction in your mental prediction, and emotion is about sort of contrast and experience. And so like when everything's smooth and expected, we tune out. And so I say Whimsy is how products become actually perceivable again because of this emotional contrast that they add. And I feel like it could be seen as like something that's like extra, not needed. It's not adding any utility or actual fundamental value. But like with what I was talking about with the brain SEO, it's how you get indexed into people's memory. So if you want people to return, then you need to be thinking about that as like one of your number one priorities. And I think like generative media tools let us do that faster than ever, and also unlock capabilities previously not even possible. Yeah. And I just wanted to say all this was generated on FAL, so I have like a code if you want to have $25 in free credits. Yeah, that is everything.